Thank you all for joining. We are kicking off our webinar on change management in the context of a website redesign. Thanks for joining. This is Evan Blackford. I'm Director of Strategy Implementation at Capellic, and I'll be moderating. And what I want to do real quick is just go through what we want you to get out of this webinar, and then just intros for the team joining. So we're going to start with kind of high-level principles that change managers should know. And then we're going to end with some tactical advice from the panel, our wonderful panel that I'm about to introduce. So once you know the high-level principles, where should you start? So that's what we're going to let you know. So real quick, just about Capellic. We are a technical strategy and Drupal development shop. We aim to get technology out of the way of strategic decision makers. We love tricky projects. That's kind of our specialty. And we also have a platform for nonprofit e-commerce optimized for conversion. So just real quick, I'm going to review a couple of ground rules. So we're generally going to take questions towards the end of the call, but please keep them coming. If there are ones that we see come in that are especially kind of relevant to the issue we're talking about at the moment, we might take a few during as well. Also, if everyone could please stay muted, that would be great. And lastly, real quick, we are recording this webinar, so we will have a link to share with your colleagues. And so those are the ground rules. If you want to tweet about this, we do have a hashtag Redesign Change Management. And also feel free to add us, but be kind and gentle, please, at Capellic, at Echo and Company, and at UNICEF Canada. We'll have panelists that I'm about to introduce from the second and third of those two entities. So first I'd like to introduce Daniel Constable. Say hello, Daniel. You're muted, Daniel. In a moment, Daniel will say hello. Daniel's the Director of Business Solutions at UNICEF Canada. His team provides strategic technology solutions for their fundraising, policy, and marketing teams. He's got 15 years of experience leading online projects for not-for-profits. And he's going to be speaking from experience not only about his work at UNICEF Canada, but also from his experience previously leading digital and technology at Canadian Cancer Society. So I see you're unmuted now, Daniel, so please say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Next up, we have Graziella Jackson. Graziella is CEO at Echo and Company, which is a human-centered design and development firm focused on technology for the public and social sector. Graziella has 10 years experience consulting on web strategy and platform projects with large nonprofit organizations and institutions. And before that, she worked in journalism and nonprofit communications and did graduate work on the intersection of technology and civic life at Georgetown. And she is a producing playwright in DC in all of her spare time. Say hello, Graziella.
One.
All right, thank you. Next we have my boss, Joel Bush. Say hello, Joel.
Hello, everybody.
Joel is partner at Capellic and is a technical strategist. He's got over 15 years of consulting to medium and large nonprofits in the US and Canada. His career started reading movie scripts in Hollywood, similar to my career start. Joel wanted me to mention that he really loves chocolate chip cookies, but perhaps wondered if that was too much. I don't think it's too much, Joel. I think that's just enough.
So. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And lastly, I'm Evan. I started in entertainment at Lifetime TV, and then at Warner Brothers as a writer and producer of entertainment marketing, including websites, casual games, and web video series. I transitioned into the nonprofit world at an Omnicom agency, working in fundraising as director of digital production and acting digital creative director. I joined Capellic 3 years ago, where I lead projects in our data-driven decision-making services. Couldn't be happier working for Joel, I have to say. And so those are the intros and ground rules and housekeeping. So we're going to just get right into the content. What I'm going to do is just pose a question to either a member of our panel or to the group, and then we'll have some kind of organic, free-ranging conversation about it. So first one is for Graziella. What do you think people hear when we say change management?
Yeah, good question. So I think that when we hear change management, what we hear is change, and that inspires a lot of fear and hesitation in people because for the most part, we spend a lot of time in our work gaining a lot of specialization, forming those specializations into departments, and then having very clear structures and decision-making structures within the organization. And anytime anyone says change management, the first thing we hear is all of that is going to be rethought or dismantled, and it's going to disrupt a lot of the ways that we're doing work, not necessarily in bad ways, but in ways that in the short term are going to cause a lot of change for us. And I think that what that feels like to individuals, teams, is that it's a lot more work, at least in the short term, with very uncertain rewards, that there's probably going to be some degree of conflict and frustration through that process because people are going to have to renegotiate sort of where they fit within the organization and how their work is structured. And then that the whole process is going to be much more difficult than one person can lead. And I think that's very, very true. And we'll get into that today. And then I think that all of those feelings are very, very real. And for individuals, kind of what causes that is really not seeing your own needs as somebody contributing to the change being reflected in the end result, being wary of the process failing, but then some of the locus of that failure being with you and with your team. I think that's a very acute feeling that a lot of people have through the process. Definitely restructuring organizations and what that might mean for your position or stability within the organization. Depending on where the culture is to begin with at the beginning of change, how much trust is there between people and between departments? A lot of people have been through change initiatives over and over again before that have not succeeded. And so there's oftentimes some just legacy perception about the change and whether or not we're actually going to be able to succeed this time around. And one really common thing is having ideas for change expressed without very clear and confident plans for implementation. I think all of those are very real and very acutely felt. And we'll I'm sure, get into a little bit how we go about addressing that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Graziella. One of the things that I think is like as an underlying thing there, along with that fear, is a sense of loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of those underlying things like, oh no, not this again, or what does this mean for me? And I think there's also probably a direct relationship to the anxiety of that related to the length of the project that's coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's time to really think about that. So in one of those areas where if it's kind of not proactively thought of, right, it's a big project, versus a small project or something like that, it just is a ripe scenario for grumpiness and anxiety, right, over time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I also feel like the first thing that so many people do is think already about when the change is over. It's sort of like, we're going to do this change. We'll all be happy when it's over. And that immediately sets it up that change is as a result. It's a product of a bunch of activities, when change, in fact, is actually a process. I like to always say, we hear the word buy-in all the time. We need buy-in. We need to involve people in the process for buy-in. And I think it's really important to shift away from buy-in and think about be-in, because back to that concept of it really can't just be owned and executed by one person. Everybody needs to understand their role in it, their contributions, what they're going to get from the process on the other side of their work, and really be involved in the process in very structured ways all throughout. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah,
go ahead. No, I'd be curious, Evan and Daniel, what you have to say or what you think about that.
Yeah, and I just think, the question is, what do people hear? I think it probably depends on what their previous experience of change has been. If things have gone well within your organization in terms of, and people trust the decisions that are being made and have had a positive experience of change, then obviously that's one thing. If your organization has not been good at managing change, then yes, then you get that, to Joel's point, that grumpiness or that resistance or that fear. So I think you really, in terms of sort of acknowledging that what people are going to be hearing when a new project starts up, when a redesign, and how they're going to absorb that. Think about the context of other change within the organization and how people have responded to that.
Right. One of the things, Daniel, that I was also thinking related to that, to all these points too, is that there's also this element of the fact that people may not know is the unstated expectation that change is upon them, right? Mm-hmm. That there's not necessarily a plan for change management, but they look at the project and they see that there's changes coming, but there has not been a discussion of change management or that's what's happening, right? It's just implied in what they're saying. I think Daniel, you kind of run into a few scenarios where you found that to be true as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think what I've experienced at the various projects that I've been involved in is yes, it's what you hear is, are you being told something that's already been decided? Are you being told something that's coming? Do you have an opportunity to participate in that, or is it being something that's being dictated to you? So again, somebody's experience or somebody's reaction to change, I think will definitely be altered by sort of when they're hearing about it and how much say they think they have in affecting that change or in the opportunity that this change presents.
One thing, Graziella, that you said early on made me feel like maybe people and organizations learn to succeed and get promoted and achieve in the context of just the normal course of running the organization, and then we come into this different phase of we're in this world of the upside down world where it's all about change, and the ways we succeed and achieve go out the window. And I'm wondering, is there a benefit to trying to blur the lines between the upside down world where the rules and the ways we succeed mean one thing, and the everyday world where they mean something different, and just try and find ways to bake the culture of change into organizational structures so it's not such a big disconnect and expectations fly out the window, and how we succeed and achieve.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a note to myself that I wanted to bring up at some point in the conversation, but it's kind of like embracing the idea that it's not going to go smoothly, and that when you can approach that idea of there are going to be bumps in the road, and you can still overcome it cohesively with whomever is on the team that's leading it, actually creates a great environment for experimentation and adaptation, a sort of sense of being in this together. And that camaraderie can sometimes come out in organizations that are very specialized and have very clear boundaries between departmental structures. Oftentimes the reaction we get is that it's very lifting to be able to actually come together and creatively build on ideas with each other. But I think there's, for anyone who works in communication and digital, I think it's a common feeling that many organizations still think of those roles as support staff. So in some ways, not central or core to the mission. So it's sort of like we have our program and mission work over here, and then these are the teams that help us communicate that mission, but they're not really in the work. And I think why technology has become such an equalizing force is because all organizations now, just because of the demands of constituents, have to be technology first. It's the material that that our engagement, or the channel our engagement happens through. And so website projects, like especially organization-wide ones, can really bring about a new mode of thinking inside of organizations, that people need to come together, that technology is going to kind of seamlessly integrate into everybody's work, and that the people who work in communications and digital and are experts in this have their own specialization to bring to the table and can really make everybody else's work shine if they're given the runway to do that work really well. But the organization has to be ready to accept that, and we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about some methodologies for advancing that forward. But that's really, really, really important, is making sure that the people who are going to be leading the change and championing the change are actually equally at the table and not seen as sort of just supporting other work that's happening within the organization. If we could see a show of hands, I'd love to see everyone on the call for whom that is an experience, but it's something we encounter all the time and hear all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because you know, what we're hearing now is digital first or digital led, or, you know, digital strategy, you know, and obviously this has been the case for, you know, all the time that I've been involved in this kind of thing. Is, do you have an online fundraising strategy? Do you have a website strategy? Now it's obviously, do you have a digital strategy? So now so in those situations, the change can actually be driven by sort of the digital aspects of our work. So, you know, yeah, to your point about being seen as a support team, or that can be the case, and that's certainly where we've tried to position our team within UNICEF Canada, is that, you know, we're a strategic partner. So the change could be driven by sort of a fundraising need, or it could be driven by an advocacy need, but also digital in and of itself gives opportunities to the organization. So in that case, it can actually be, you know, quote unquote digital that's actually driving that change. And I think that that's certainly something that I'm seeing a lot more in the last couple of years than it would have been a few years ago, where now your agents of change are the technology people, but not in a sense of, you know, sort of new machines or new systems, but just that your social media person, your content person, they're now, you know, they're digital first people. They're not adjusting their plans and things like that, or we now must get this on the website. It's the digital aspect that's actually driving that change within the organization, and then the organization is going to have to change to match that. So now we're introducing another type of change that other people, other teams are going to have to sort of get used to if they want to stay relevant and stay up to date with these, as I say, these opportunities that are coming our way.
Excellent. So I'm going to move to the next question here, but first I want to just call out, if folks want to ask questions, we would love that. Feel free to use the chat feature here in Zoom to ask those, and we would very much appreciate it. So the next question, now that we've kind of done an overview, what do we mean when we, you know, what do people hear when we say change management? I do want to get kind of tactical here. This will be for everybody on the panel. I'll maybe start with you, Daniel. As a change manager on a team, what principles do you think folks on the webinar should know? So getting into the tactics of how do you do this,
Sure.
What do you suggest people bring to the table from your experience?
Yeah, so I think from my experience, and obviously the title of this of this webinar is about redesign, but I think what I think is important for us to do at the start of some kind of web redesign or digital redesign project is really understand, is this actually a redesign project, or is it another organizational change sort of which the redesign is one aspect of it? Because it's very rare. I don't think I've been involved in, other than sort of like a smartening up of a website or something like that, where you really are just sort of changing some images or changing some logo or something like that. But generally, when we're redesigning a website, it's because some other change has happened or is in the process of happening, and the website needs to stay in step with that. So I think it's really important, and we sort of fall into this trap, ourselves, as we'll call something a web redesign project, but the chances are it's a new brand, it's a change to the identity of the organization, it's some kind of issue that is being addressed in terms of the way that we position ourselves, or in terms of our priority around fundraising activity A over fundraising activity B. Maybe we're doing a redesign because we're also changing our content management system. And so when we start thinking about this, suddenly the change that we're now dealing with is so much bigger than, are people okay with a redesign of the website? So I think it's really important for us to understand, then everybody that's impacted by this. So, and obviously that then changes depending on the type of project it is, or as I say, the type of change that we're seeing. So, who are the people that are directly impacted by the change that you're seeing? So, if it's an e-commerce project, if in our organisation, anytime that we're changing our donation forms, we're changing our survival gifts platform, anything like that, often the most important person that we need to talk to is our manager of donor services, because all of these changes that we do on the front end, eventually downstream, they result in transactions, and they result in donors placing orders, making donations that then need to be managed. And if we don't include our manager of donor services in our conversations early, then we're going to mess something up for them, and then she's going to be knocking on our doors. Why isn't this look the way that it is? So I think, like I say, it's understanding the scope of the project and the type of change that this is actually resulting in. And I think, at the beginning of your project, that's the single most important thing to consider.
Yeah.
Got it. So it sounds like, first you ask, is this a redesign? Is this a real sort of deep organizational brand level change, posing as some website production, or is this really more tactical? And depending on the answer to that, the way you loop in your constituents in the organization really needs to change. So if it's really a deep sort of brand level change, it sounds like you're saying that's when we talk about buy-in from everybody, and really getting everybody's seat at the table and participating in the change. If we're really talking about this is a change to a platform, and somebody in data services or donor services is going to be messed up just in their job by not having some crucial information, we can't overlook that either. Right?
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's exactly right. And then once you've identified that change, who's now the person that is the best positioned to lead that individual type of change? Because if you've got a technical web developer that's responsible for overseeing the implementation of the web design, you don't want that person going and saying to a fundraising leader, oh, by the way, your fundraising initiative, yeah, we're not doing that so much anymore. We're focused more on event fundraising. Your tribute giving is actually knocked down the list. Obviously, clearly, that change has to be driven by the relevant person. If we're affecting change of and to get into the sort of the minutiae of it, but if we're changing the payment processor as part of this, then make sure that somebody who's responsible for that is out in front of that, and they're the ones that are communicating that change. I think that's the other area where in previous roles I've got caught out is when you're telling somebody else of a change that's happening to their program, either assuming that A, that they knew, or B, not understanding the actual impact that this change would have. And suddenly, not only are you in a bad position, but now your change management's shot, because now the quote unquote IT guy is telling you that your program isn't important as it was, sort of 20 minutes ago. So I think just making sure that your agents of change, those champions of change, are the relevant person for each type, and make sure you're not mixing it from one to the other, so that message is not communicated clearly and not listened to.
That's
Right.
great.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you haven't spoken in a while, Grazi. Go ahead.
So I feel like people probably will have a common experience of design being the thing that everyone is really excited for and ready to get their hands on in a project. So I just want to bring it back to a just website specific kind of case study and talk a little bit about what it means to engage people meaningfully through the process before you get to that point. So I don't know how many on the call have been through a process where you're working on a project, it's really big, it seems to be going pretty well. Then you get to the point of showing a homepage design and everything sort of falls apart there. And a part of that is because design, I call design a landmine, but really what it is it's the first really emotional experience somebody has to something that comes out of the process for a project like this, because it's visual, it's powerful. It helps people sort of express their own thoughts and ideas a little bit more concretely about a project. But it also is very political, because it's the moment when people feel like they have something concrete to react to. And if they don't see a lot of what their personal needs and maybe personal agendas for themselves or their department, they didn't see it reflected in the process, that's the moment it's all going to come out. And that can be from boards of directors all the way down to content producers. It really doesn't matter in the organization. It's a common thing that happens. And so we always like to say when we start up front is understanding the unique problems to solve, because a lot of times what the organization is responding to is there are organizational structure challenges, some governance challenges with interdepartmental communication and workflows, lots of things that are, people have wrapped up in their hopes for what a project like this is going to solve. And ultimately, design can't solve any of those problems. Design is a solution to a design problem. So it's how content is displayed. It's how you use visuals to create a more immersive and emotional connection with that content. But it's not going to solve deep organizational challenges. And so one of the first things we always ask before we go into a project is, where do we have to start? Are we all aligned as an organization? Are we on the same page? Can we move into design and really have it do what it's good at? Or do we need to take a step back and really deal with some of those organizational expectations? And the good news is that if it's structured well, it is easy to do with some very good kind of methodologies in place. We do oftentimes in that case advise to take the time to really go deep in the organization with stakeholders, really gather goals, requirements, understand the current state of things, especially let people air any grievances or frustrations they have in kind of a safe space, and then start to ideate about how change is going to be structured and managed and what's realistic and what isn't. That's really necessary. But that being said, you want to do that during discovery. You want them to be involved in helping to shape the requirements and sort of the strategic direction, but you don't want everybody to be involved all the way down through the design. And there are ways to structure that we can talk a little bit about. But that's really important. I don't know, different organizations do this in different ways. We do two things right up front in projects. We do what we call role definition and modeling. So we use either a MOCA model or a RACI model, depending on what organizations prefer. MOCA stands for Manager, Owner, Consulted, Helper, and Approve, I believe. And RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Supporting, Consulted, and Informed. You can create your own models as well. But any stakeholder who's going to be at all impacted by or is interested in the project needs to be mapped based on their degree of interest in the project and their degree of being impacted. the people who are highly interested and highly impacted, those are the ones that you want to make your allies, and they can help to really lead and guide change through the organization. People actually who are not impacted but highly interested in the project, those also can be your biggest derailers. And so you want to bring them close into the project as well, and really thinking through everybody's contributions, and then taking these models that I mentioned and just mapping people based on what their contributions are going to be and what their roles are is really important. And then the last thing I'll say is, probably everyone here has been on calls or meetings where it's really hard to differentiate between like a lot of idea gathering or creation, so a lot of brainstorming, and then things that are actually actionable. We call them requirements. But sort of, while all ideas are welcome, not all ideas are, created equally. They're not all requirements to be acted on. And a requirement, like something you can actually put some scope and timeline and planning around, it has to have a strong business case or organizational case and objectives. You have to have data to support it. It has to be measurable so you can actually track metrics on it. And it has to be operationally and technically feasible in the short term. And so there are ways to kind of gather all ideas, but really classify the ones that meet those criteria and then organize them onto a roadmap. So everyone sees their ideas reflected and they know that they're there, and maybe some of their ideas are categorized as future, but at least everybody feels heard. And then you get to that subset of ideas that are actually actionable and feasible. And then you have to get everybody's understanding of that path and communicate it, and especially get leadership and decision makers to be on board with that approach. I know that was a lot of high level, and we can get into the details later, but I would say a process like that could take 2 weeks. It could take 16 weeks. I've seen it take 50 weeks. So it just depends on the organization and the unique challenges that are being solved. But I think just thinking through that as a critical part of it is really important.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting pieces to I just heard both of you and Daniel talk about, which I've been jotting things down as you were talking, but a couple of things. That the mapping is a really powerful activity to do as part of a project. And because what also jumped out at me is in relation to what Daniel said, also about who's the right person to be involved at the right time, and what kind of decisions are being made. And the person who, for example, is managing the database, right? That the scope of that person, when do they need to be consulted, in this process, and do they need to be, if they're more tactical, they don't necessarily need to be involved up front, other than some high level requirements. But that getting that lay of the land through the mapping and identifying where the right people are plugged in at the right time is, the difference that can make on any project is enormous, right? So anyways, that's cool. I like that.
Cool. So we need to jump to the next question, but sorry, go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing, just to the point of the questions, or the note of the listing out all the things that people are saying that they're looking for, the requirements, and the high level items, which is that it also seems, Grazi, that has the ability to identify conflicting requirements, right? To pull out of if one person in this department is saying we need to achieve this with the website, another person is saying we need to achieve something else with the website that is in in conflict.
Yeah.
Getting these things down actually surfaces that in a scenario where you may not otherwise have surfaced it, right?
Yeah.
And then that says, okay, that tells the project manager, the consulting lead, or the team, that kind of the core team, hey, we got to discuss this because this is signaling a problem.
Yeah, we did on a project we did with a big art museum. We gathered it all into a very simple tool that we built, a roadmap tool in Google Sheets, because it can be a nice collaborative tool. And I saw a question about the tool set. so we can answer that as well. And we had 199 requirements, which was really unsatisfying. We wanted it to be 200, but we couldn't come up with another one. And we had a meeting with about 23 stakeholders, and everything was classified a variety of ways. But the three most important were level of severity. So how critical was that problem to the organization? Level of priority. So how important was it? And then level of effort. So how easy or difficult was it to accomplish? And then we just had everybody do a thumbs up, thumbs down. So we put a timer on. We only gave 3 minutes per requirement. Anything we couldn't talk about in 3 minutes, we put on a list to come back to, because that told us that probably we weren't ready to move forward with that one. Time can be a really useful resource in those settings. And then we just did a thumbs up, thumbs down, and it was just a majority rules. So we would note what the categorization was based on the majority, and if somebody wanted to contest it, we would take notes on what that contestation was. And it was a really useful process. And then the organization adopted it and started moving it forward. So I think highly structuring the environment is really useful. And then I know, Evan, you want to move on to the next question, which is great.
Well, the next question is actually the brass tacks. How do we do that? So I feel like we're already there.
Yeah. Is it okay if I answer Brian's question in the chat?
Yeah, that would be great. So just maybe state it and then answer.
Great. Yeah, so the question is, we might get to this, but curious to hear the tools that people use for change management within the organization. Is it good to have a centralized hub like SharePoint or other tools? My best answer to that is figure out what tools people are already using and that they're habituated to, because when you're going through change management, asking people to learn a new tool is like one of the biggest things that comes up as a frustration. So if there's something in place that could be adapted for the purpose, that's great. If not, I think people will find value in using a tool if it solves problems. So if it's like we're not able to easily collaborate on things, or we can't co-edit work, or we don't know easily how to get back to something. So I think it's trying to figure out what the goals are for the change and then mapping systems to what would be most useful. In our case, mostly we use Basecamp, and then we use Google Docs, and those tend to get widely adopted in most organizations because they're pretty easy to use and collaborate with.
Yeah, I would say one thing I'd add to that too is that the tools, I mean, without saying like a specific tool, which I know is the question at hand here, is the ability to interact with it in different ways, right? Log in, email, that kind of thing. So to help it work, like to your point of people interact in different ways, like we want to allow people to interact with things in the way they're used to interacting. And so those tools that allow for multiple ways to interact is typically ideal.
And yeah, the one other point I would make is whatever we can do to make it so that those tools are not, that someone doesn't have a lot of reading. So a lot of the frustration people have is like questions and answers and decisions are trapped in narrative documents, and they're trapped in email discussions and things that just require a lot of work for people to go back and figure out what agreements were made or what disagreements need to be tracked. So my team always jokes that I love spreadsheets, and it's true, and it wasn't always the case. But to the degree that you can take things out of narrative documents and use things like the to-do list in Basecamp or spreadsheets that are easy to scan and filter and sort, and those things, people tend to like them better.
Excellent. Let me just quickly, before we move totally out of the world of principles and into the world of the brass tacks, how do we do this? I do want to just quickly see if we can recap some of the principles we heard. So from you, Daniel, I heard a really important one, which is key principle: involve the right people in the right way, depending on their role and the nature of the change we're trying to do. I think that's a really key principle. And then the second principle I heard was know where we are in the change process. So in conversion optimization, we talk about, definitely know where the user is in the conversion funnel. And I think I heard being intentional about where we are in the change process, and using different tools and asking different questions depending on where we are in the change process is key as well. And to that end, I think this idea of really trying to separate out idea gathering from more formal requirements agreement is a key sort of example of that. And we talked about some tools that are good for facilitating, both of those and transitioning from the one to the other. We'll get more into tools in the next section. And then lastly, just be careful of design. It is that shiny object that everybody wants to kind of jump to. But really, we can't jump to solutions, and design is, to me, the ultimate solution. We really need to focus on goals and problems at the top, even though design is that shiny object that everybody's going to want to jump to. Did I get those about right? Do we have others that I missed?
Yeah, Evan, I realize there's one completely missing, and it's not because you missed it, it's because we didn't talk about it. So I'll plug it quickly, which is insights. As much as the direction that you're heading in can be informed by data and real, I was going to say end user insights, but what I really mean is people who are ultimately going to be the beneficiary of the website or the program, so that the end users. It's amazing how when we break out of the organizational mindset, because we've all gone native, it's really difficult for us to actually see how things are going to work when they get out in the real world, because we're not out there anymore and we have a very internal understanding of our work. The more we can bring people in from the outside to co-design solutions with us, it does two things. It breaks something that in the design world we know of as the genius effect or the genius bias, where it's like we all think we have the best creative ideas, and in fact we don't. They're usually out there somewhere else to be found. It brings in real world voices from end users. It helps us to ground our thinking. And when we do design and feedback, we actually ask our teams to all role play one of our user personas when they come to the table for reviews and those sorts of things. So they're actually not able to represent themselves in all of our sessions. Quite oftentimes they're adopting a persona that they have to represent at the table. So that can be really useful. And then when you're arguing really difficult points, people are arguing with data and insights and not arguing with you. And that feels better as a change leader, and it works better inside the organization.
Excellent. Well, that's a good transition into the brass tacks. Now that we kind of know these principles, where do we get started? Because data is kind of, data also plays a key role in that. Just before we move off of tools, I just wanted to see, Daniel, from your perspective, if you had anything else to say on tools as we get into the how do we actually do this?
No, my experience with tools is pretty much the same as what everybody else has said. Something that's robust enough and rigorous enough, but no more so. So don't try to overly, sort of get these things overly complex. But then, like the point was made, don't be chasing through email trails for the final decision that was made on something. But yes, we tend to use things like Google Docs, just where we can have that central editable repository of ideas and decisions that are made. So yeah, just try to keep it formal enough.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, one actually quick follow-up on that. I mean, as you're obviously sitting on the client side of this, and so you have different consultants coming in with different types of tools, not necessarily looking for kind of what the optimal tool is and that, but just am interested in if you have a perspective on, adding in a new tool, to this mix, and like how much and the impact that has on the team in terms of getting kind of into the, on the change management side, like.
I think in terms of change management, I don't think that is so much an issue in other areas. Yes, that's exactly right. You start working with a new partner, a new vendor, and they have a new way of doing things. As you know, Joel, our project manager that we use is she's tied to the way that she works. So it's normally a matter of trying to get, making sure that the partner you're working with is then working in something that's, is what we use as the client. So no, we try to have a standard approach within our organization, which, is then a different problem that you're trying to manage. Like I say, you're now trying to make sure that a vendor that might have, and obviously Capellic is not one of these that we would have a challenge with, but not every vendor wants to be as formal as you do. Like they want to, yeah, we know what we're doing. Yeah, we'll get you that. But really, when it comes to tracking things, and obviously specifically change management we're talking about today, is making sure that the partner that you're working with takes it as seriously as you do internally. Because I do think that as much as there's a risk inside your organization that you will dismiss change management, or there's a risk that change management can be dismissed, well, of course it's the right thing to do because we're doing it, is the fact that I have found with some partners I've worked with that they can be quite blasé with things like this. It's because, partly because it's not their problem. They're doing the work that you're telling them to do. So why would they be concerning themselves? Whereas you as the clients are sort of looking at them and saying, well, but you've done lots of these projects. Our team, this is the first one we've done. Where's your guidance and expertise? I think that's sort of been my experience is that often where we've had a problem is because the partner doesn't have tools, the partner doesn't have that degree of rigor to bring to the process. So I think, again, that's something else that you as the agents of change within your own organization, you just need to make sure that maybe you're having to do that for your partner as well.
Excellent. Guys, feel free to ask additional questions in the chat. We'd love more questions. In the meantime, I do want to get into some tangible takeaways from each of you. And this has been a great conversation, but I do want to leave anybody who's tuned in with some tactical, okay, coming away from this, here's what I would share with somebody else who wasn't able to attend this webinar. So maybe Graziella, we could start with you.
Sure. So I think just recapping from before, just have a very clear vision and direction that everyone can get on board with, that's communicated, that you have co-captains throughout the organization who help to socialize it and then lead it within their teams. Put structure around the vision and the direction, clearly define people's roles and contributions through things like MOCA modeling and RACI modeling. Separate ideation out from actionable requirements, involve as many people as you can in the ideation, the synthesis of requirements, and then get their approval for you to move on without everybody involved in the process. Start small, as much as you can develop a proof of concept, so something small that really changes people's lives and make them better. People will get on board with change if they can feel tangible benefits. Try things out. The ones that kind of stand out as the most successful, then replicate them, do them again, mature them into more formal processes. People will also get on board through that process. And then you can go bigger with your change because people are always wanting to buy into a successful and sure thing.
Excellent. Those were excellent and succinct. I appreciate that. Daniel, how about you?
Sure. Yeah. Again, sort of recapping some of the things that we've already talked about. But as I say, I understand the change that you're managing. As I said before, everybody might want to call it a website redesign project, but you as the leader, you need to make sure that you really understand what is the actual change that you're managing. And then who is the appropriate person to drive each aspect of that change? When you're in the requirements phase or, the discovery phase, whatever you call it in your process, make sure that you understand that the impact that these changes of requirements or these changes of approach are going to be having on people. When you go through a web design project, and Graziella mentioned about, when you reveal the homepage, that's where things come out. The other area is top-level navigation. Top-level navigation is in my experience, in the worst cases, is a battleground because some people think they're winning and some people think they're losing. And you want to be out in front of that. You want to be anticipating that. If there's a shift away from event-based fundraising over to major gifts, and therefore the website is now being changed to reflect that, make sure that you know that the event people are going to feel that that's a loss, and that they're not going to be able to achieve what they need to because you're taking something away from them. So make sure that you've identified that and you are managing those very specific elements. And then, yeah, just in the specifics of whose job or role is changing. You know, I had a very specific example, you know, about a good few years ago now, more than 10 years ago now, where we rolled out a new peer-to-peer platform. And it was going to be great. We were going to raise a lot more, you know, it's going to be a lot better look and feel. We're going to raise a lot more money. This is going to be this much better experience. And I was doing some training for a group of users, and they said, well, where do I put in my site number? At this event, we have people that put a tent up, and I put the site number into the online system. That had never come up. And so then we wasted essentially an hour of a day's training because everybody now was panicking about the loss of this one feature. If we now, I have taken that lesson, I've thought about that in every project. What's the equivalent of that on my project? What's the thing that we think we're dealing with big organizational change, but we've got one team that are going to be, you know, are they going to be disrupted by this? And just trying to make sure that you're managing that, because at the beginning of the project is the time to do it, because the future version of yourself, you know, 6 months from now, it will be grateful that you spent the time to do that at the beginning of the project and not dealing with things as they come up. So yeah, just really identifying, even down to the minutiae, who's going to be affected by this, and who do I need to handhold through that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Joel, before I get to you, we do have one other question from Jennifer.
Great question, by the way, Jennifer.
Yeah, great
like
question.
You just teed this up perfectly for me and Graziella.
Yeah. So the question is, do you guys recommend doing small changes on a website before totally blowing up the site and replacing it with an entirely new site built on a new platform? And I suspect I can guess at some possible answers. Joel, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, and then I'll toss it over to Graziella, because we spent a lot of time talking about this thing to a bunch of different people. And it actually has to do, the answer is actually a little different than either one of these. It's looking to break the cycle of the redesign, is the actual end goal of the process. And the form that takes, whether it's small changes or redesign, is the outflow from, you know, how you go about breaking the cycle of redesign. Graziella, over to you.
Thank you. I get overly excited when I get this question, because I think it all boils down to there's where the organization is in terms of its digital or website platforms, and where it needs to be in using those platforms to really just advance its mission, to scale the work. It's different for every organization at the outset, but really you want to get to a place where you're not redesigning. There's really no need in this day and age for you to have to reinvent your tools over and over again from a technology perspective. The technology has gotten so advanced and design has gotten so decoupled from the technology that you should actually be able to even make major changes to your information architecture and not have to completely redesign your site. So it's good to get into a place eventually where you can do continuous improvement, and every quarter, every year, you're doing major improvements to the site, you're sunsetting certain things, you're adding new functionality. That's a really hard shift for organizations, especially boards of directors and funders who want to give you one budget and then they want it to all be done within a year. And to see it as a fluid thing is a big conversation about just the nature of the organization shifting. So I think there are small things that you can do to start incrementally shifting the site experience and optimizing things and gathering data and making improvements. And those work really well in environments where nonprofits are risk averse And there's a big scarcity mindset because there's no guarantee that those fundraising dollars are going to be coming in, or funder dollars are going to be coming in. And so again, back to that proof of concept ideas, like having small measurable improvements can help make the case for something more comprehensive. And then in the future, really the only reason why you need to redesign is if the audience has totally shifted, the brand identity has totally shifted, it needs to change, if there's a big strategic change. But you should get to a place where you really aren't doing those things very often. And that is just more beneficial for the organization. It conserves resources, it conserves people's energy and effort in a positive way.
Yeah, real quick, I want to get to Joel's takeaway points, but just also wanted to take a stab at an answer to that question from a conversion optimization standpoint. So when we're talking about A/B testing and optimization for conversions, there's a principle that we want to start iteratively, optimize with small changes, and be rigorous about using control versions. Until we can't optimize anymore, until we can't put forward A/B tests that get a big enough lift to be measurable with statistical confidence. And then we typically want to test against a radical redesign version of that conversion element. So just aside from the, why you would redesign, if you're redesigning because you have a new branding, initiative, that's one thing. But if we're really just trying to improve conversion, there is kind of a best practice way you do that. So Joel, what should folks take out of this webinar from your perspective?
Okay, I'll go real quick, and we might go a couple minutes over. We won't be offended if people have follow-on meetings, but real quick, I would say in my list is be thorough, but don't over-prescribe the actual process for people to, in terms of the change, like the changes that they have to make. For example, workflows around, so I wanted to couple the actual, like what it is that a person does is, change management does not mean over-prescribing the process they have to go through to creating content on site. Second is involve your devs and creative team early. They each see the world in a different way, and they bring different perspectives to the project and will flag different things and have different thoughts about how to proceed. And last is, and you've heard this a few different times, is this idea of iterate. The idea is that not everything has to be done at the get-go, and is to look for those opportunities to really focus on what they call the minimum viable product to get things up and running, and then use data to see how you improve, and you adjust from there, from that point, but not to try to take off to do too much at any given time.
Excellent. And I think key to that is learning as you go. So if you lead up to a massive redesign with iterative change, and you're careful about capturing learning along the way, that helps you inform your radical redesign as well. So we have one more question from the team. I just want to be sensitive to our panelists' time. Graziella and Daniel, do you have to drop off, or can you stick on a couple minutes?
I've got a couple minutes, yeah.
Same.
Excellent. All right, from Dave Hightower, we have the question. I think this one will go to you, Daniel, if you've had a good answer for this. Well, here it comes. So feel free to lob it back if you prefer to do that. If you do a complete site redesign and all the pages and URLs change, what's the best way to keep the SEO you've built up over the years for URL paths, et cetera?
Well, I am going to punt it back, because I would, as I saw that question come in, the way that I would say is I would talk to Joel and get him to figure out how we would do it. So I'm going to push it that way.
Yeah, I would say it's related to the tools that are at your disposal is one of it, and two is identifying. There are a few parts to it. So let me back up a little bit. We would generally actually start with doing a review of the content that is actually required, that makes the cut after the redesign, that's still in alignment. And so there is that entire process that that we would want organizations to go through in terms of this is the ROT analysis, redundant, outdated, trivial process, where clients are going through their content to decide like what is still relevant to a new paradigm. And then from there, the decision-making structures then becomes, okay, for the things that don't exist, what happened? And then it just becomes a technical challenge. For the things that no longer exist, where do they go? Where do things point? And then for the things that are staying and changing, where do they go? For the things that are staying unchanged, where does that new place live on the web? And that just becomes a technical challenge, which is can easily be handled with redirects and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and a couple things that we've seen too is there has to be space in the project and ownership by somebody. Sometimes it's on your creative partner side, sometimes it's internally, to mapping the old site content to the new sitemap and to creating a very robust URL redirect plan, and then also a backlinking plan. So if you have a lot of organizations that are linking to your content, using a tool that helps you figure out what those primary sources are, and then actually reaching out to them and letting them know that the content is changing so that they can relink to new content as that's relevant. There's lots of other things that you can put in place there, but you really do want to make sure you're kind of optimizing as much as possible and then capturing old URLs and doing redirects to new pages versus just having a generic redirect. And normally, if you do that process well and you have content strategy threaded all the way through, you'll see some drops in the first couple months, but you do tend to rebuild pretty quickly. And we always like to, if we can, keep an archived version of the site live. So it's really for a short period of time. So it's really easy to triage content if you need to, not accessible to the public and just a core team of people working on the redesign, but that can be really helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your insights, panel, and for your questions, attendees. As I mentioned, we will have a link to the recording of this webinar that you can share with colleagues or other folks you think would get something out of it. So thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rosie. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.